I have a question to ask you. Is Donald Trump, the current US president, a fascist? Well, this person doesn't think so.
So first things first, we need a definition of fascism. As you can see, this is not my own definition. I did not make this up. This is from Merriam-Webster. So this is a...
Okay, so this is already a problem. You're using a dictionary definition, not a political definition. So dictionaries are a way of communicating, which will already be a problem. Because obviously a dictionary definition is going to be a way to understand other people rather than to actually be particularly accurate. Now, generally, it is better for science because obviously science words aren't typically used by people in a non-science fashion. But it's
widely accepted academic description and definition of what fascism is.
Is it? Because Collins' English Dictionary disagrees with them in a certain way. Collins' English Dictionary is an ideology or movement inspired by Italian fascism, such as German National Socialism, any right-wing nationalist ideology or movement with an authoritarian and hierarchical structure that's fundamentally opposed to democracy and liberalism. Or alternatively, an ideology or movement or program or tendency that could be categorized as excessively prescriptive or authoritarian. Remind you, or now.
What I want to do is break this definition apart.
Once again, we're running into minutia here. You're not supposed to do that. Let's say we had in the Collins English Dictionary, if you had prescriptive was definition that changed in between when this definition was created and now, basically. In that situation, you could argue the definition is therefore inaccurate in terms of breaking the definition down. You can understand the definition using common, just basic comprehension, but by breaking the definition down, you begin to break the definition completely.
And look at examples of it from the past and compare it to where we are right now.
Like, for example, excessively is not exactly, what do you mean by excessively? What is excessive? A bit of an arbitrary thing, isn't
Donald
it?
Trump or any other political leader for that matter. Okay, here we go. Fascism, a populist political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual.
Yeah, but that's America. That just is America. America's always been like that. Well, at least in modern history.
That is associated with a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, and that is characterized by severe economic and social regimentation and by forcible suppression of opposition. Let's start out with that first one, populism.
See that little part of forcible suppression? That's not in other definitions. That's because, well, we'll get into why that's not in the other definitions. It's for basic reasons. It's not accurate.
A political philosophy or movement that represents or is claimed to represent the interests of ordinary people, especially against the establishment. Again, Merriam-Webster, not my definition. First of all, just about every system of government nowadays is populist, right? Every governor, every president, every prime minister.
Do you notice that? We're already beginning to get into the inaccuracies here. You've gone from every system to naming elected individuals. Some systems are not democratic. So, for example, if you're prime minister of a country and you are elected, except you're not elected. You're not elected democratically. You're elected by people who are democratically elected. But you yourself do not need to be populist. You're prime minister. The prime minister of England did not need to be populist because they needed the party to win, and then they, by proxy, win. But in the UK, a prime minister was chosen who was excessively unpopular in their own constituency and throughout the country. The reality is you don't need to win elections based on yourself. You only need your party to win elections, and then you need to win your party over. This is already inaccurate. And beyond that, you also have people who don't win elections but are potential government figures. You also have dictatorships. So
any elected official is trying to say...
But it's not just elected official. It has to be elected directly by the people, which is not most people. And then we get into this.
I am by the people, for the people. I have your ordinary person's interests at heart, because those people are the majority of the electorate in any...
Now, here's why this is inaccurate. Do you want to know how many people voted for Donald Trump in the US election? It was less than 80 million. Do you want to know the electorate in the United States? It's about 220 million people. Now that might seem like that is in fact not the majority, and you'd be right. The majority of people did not choose Donald Trump. They did not choose Kamala Harris. They in fact did not choose anyone. The most popular choice was to not vote. The majority of the country, in fact, chose not to vote. That is the thing you need to include, because the electorate is also a bit of a dodgy thing. If you just say, well, this country doesn't allow women to vote, doesn't allow marginalised groups to vote, only allows you to vote if you've got property, and you're over the age of 50. In that situation, that would be the electorate, but it wouldn't be the people, right? That wouldn't be a democracy. We'd be able to understand that fact. So in that situation, you have to go, how many people are in the country? Because generally the idea is, while we don't allow children to vote, the fact that their parents are to vote, the fact that their older peers are allowed to vote, they will basically make up for them not being allowed to vote. If there's 10 million people in the country that can't vote, then people will win by at least like 5 million if it's a coin flip, and by at least the number of people that roughly would go there anyway. Basically, we can feel rest assured that even if we did give them the right to vote, that, and they weren't corrupted, that things would end up the same way, at least roughly. And that's the system that most people say is the reason why we'd be okay with not allowing somebody the right to vote. It's that letting them vote, having them vote, wouldn't change the system. But you can't say that in America, because the reality is less than around 150 million people vote in the US election, which is less than half the population. No US president has ever gained over 25% of the population to vote for them. Ever. That is a remarkable achievement in not having a democracy. Let's not pretend for a minute that this is a majority thing. No, it's not.
Any situation. The key part of that is especially or against the establishment, right? Which just means essentially that there's some system in place that we hate, that we need to get rid of, that's keeping us down.
Not that there is something in place, there is something said to be in place. Like, obviously, if you said that there are people controlling the media, you're being anti-Semitic, probably. You're probably being anti-Semitic. And then you round people up who are supposed to control the media. Or maybe you revoke their license to talk. And you go, that's against the amendment, isn't it? Oh, the courts disagree. The courts say it's actually fine. Okay. Maybe you don't take away their license. You just force them into doing it by saying, we will take away your license if you don't do as we say. That sort of thing, where you aren't actually going after something real. You're going after something fake. That's still, quote unquote, the establishment, though. They're just not actually real. It's fake.
But that also means that punk rock is populist, and I don't know if you've listened to a lot of punk rock. It's pretty anti-fascist. Looking at historical examples, yes, Hitler was very much...
This is weird, right? This is the part where they just does Nazi propaganda.
For the ordinary people, right? He even created Volkswagen, which is supposed
That's propaganda.
to be the people's car, right? He promised...
Like, the Nazi party were really, really, really big on propaganda. I mean, many people were when you get into the war period, but that was obviously for good reason. I would argue. He says this as well.
Get the economy back on track and get the ordinary person back to work, and he did, to be honest.
No, he didn't. This is not even, true, if you actually think about this for a minute. So, the Nazis interned millions of people into camps, killed millions of them, but interned millions more. And, yeah, some of the people weren't German. A lot of them weren't German. But a good chunk of them were. So, those people are obviously doing jobs. Well, most of them were doing jobs beforehand. So, you have to include those people and go, okay, all those people who are doing jobs, you gotta stop counting them. Because if you just say, well, I fired Timmy and hired John, you didn't create a job. You just gave John a job. It was Timmy's job. So you can't count all the jobs that were, quote unquote, created by taking them away from, Jewish people, for example. You can't count on any of them. You can't count on any of the army jobs because, yeah, if you invade other countries, yeah, I guess those are jobs. That's not really creating employment. Anyone could do that. That's, you could just pay people to sit around and do nothing. That would technically be a job because you've paid them. You can't count that at all. So when you examine that, you go, okay, and then you go, okay, the economy. Ooh, okay. I mean, the economy was improving because the Weimar Republic, the economy was improving under them as well. And then the Americans, who were giving them loans, their economy collapsed. And then the Americans said, no more loans for you, and also you kind of want those loans back. They were also paying the Treaty of Versailles. They were, up until recently, actually, Germany was paying that. And not that recently, it was about a decade or two ago, that they were paying that. But the point is that they're paying these loans off, and they have hyperinflation. And the thing about hyperinflation is, it's relatively easy to improve the economy after you've had hyperinflation. I say improve. I don't mean make it good. I mean make it no longer hyperinflation. That's not impressive. That will mostly, as long as you don't do anything stupid, work itself out. Your economy's still fucked though, right? Like, you know? So, what happens when they start doing that? Well, they start having the war, and yeah, that doesn't go too well for Germans on the ground. In fact, Germans on the ground start to see their businesses shutter. They start to see many of their before their labourers who were working go off and fight, and in many cases die. And yeah, it doesn't go too well for Germans. It doesn't go too well for most people in Europe, to be clear. Not particularly to the Germans, but like they were the cause of it, so you know. My point I'm making is Hitler was the cause of that. I'm not going to blame the French for the problem for French people, obviously. They were the ones who were attacked. But what I'm saying is, because of that fact, because Hitler wasn't the cause of that, Hitler did not make that better. He made it worse, actually, if you actually examine the intention, what he could have done versus what he did.
Be honest. So is Donald Trump populist? Absolutely.
So I don't know why you did that, like Nazi propaganda there. That was just very weird.
100% populist, but so is Kamala Harris.
Kinda, yeah.
Populism does not necessarily equate to fascism. It is a characteristic of fascism. It is not necessarily...
Not necessarily. There are lots of fascists that take over by just doing a coup. Like, Hitler tried to do a coup. Mussolini kind of did a sort of a fake coup. He marched on Rome, but like it was largely sort of like a, you're probably going to win an election, so we'll just give power to you now, sort of thing. And it wasn't really a real coup as such. But the point still stands: the fascists often take over via coup, not from elections. Therefore, they don't often have to be populist. They often can get away with just sort of going, these people are a problem. Am I going to solve any problems? That's not mentioning any actual solutions. These people are a problem, and then can you argue that that's populist? You know. Yes, you do have fascists who lie and blame institutions, but you also have fascists who just outright just coast on racism alone, or at least close enough to racism alone.
Equate to it, though. It also used the words movement, philosophy, or regime, and it's important to know that regime can just mean any kind of governing body, but it is usually associated with authoritarianism, which we'll get to
usually associated with. Not particularly an accurate phrase, but anyway.
Later. Going back to our definition of fascism, we have that it exalts nation, often race, above the...
Here is where the American goes absolutely insane. Decides, America isn't nationalistic. I mean, you know, all those Americans going, USA, 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 as they do, you know, a coup on the US of A. All those Americans who have their American flag waving in America. All those Americans who are constantly using the national anthem. All those Americans who are, you know, having, well, the Confederate flag as well. Bit weird that there was an opponent to the US. But anyway, the point I'm making is the US is excessively nationalistic. I would say the US is probably the most nationalistic country possibly of any so-called free country. You know, the only other more nationalistic countries are countries that are either involved in war or countries that they have a dictatorship. North Korea is an example. But then you actually examine and go, okay, but we don't know what actual North Koreans do. We just know what North Korean state says. That's a bit different, right? You can't just say North Koreans think this because the North Korean government says that they do. That would obviously be mad. You know.
The individual. This is where it gets kind of muddy, right? Because nationalism can very easily be confused with patriotism.
Actually, no. It's just America is nationalistic and has been. So you don't want to admit the fact that your country has already taken a few steps towards fascism for the past few decades. I'm not calling you fascist there. I know some people would, but the reality is you have to admit that fact. America is far more nationalistic than most countries. In my country, you wouldn't see the Irish flag waving everywhere all the time, with the exception of, obviously, St. Patrick's Day or the like. Typically, if you see an Irish flag, it's because like it's a government building or someone's a racist. That's generally the tendency, you know.
The difference is
or sorry, I should add, or it's abroad. That's where it's acceptable abroad.
The potency of it, or the vehemency of it, if that makes sense.
So just a quick point here. Some of the things that this person has said were confidence. We'll get into that. Where like I'll flash something up on screen, and it's more so what happened. And I don't feel that that's too fair because the person obviously didn't know that was going to happen, but also they should have known that that could happen. So still a fucking idiot. But here is where it's kind of weird because like. Do you happen to remember when Trump launched those Bibles that were made by Lee Greenwood, and he was like advertising them and was saying it's the Trump Bible and it's got the Declaration of Independence and in it as well? Do you feel like it's a little bit weird for religious people to go, you know what I should do? I should attach my country's Declaration of Independence to this. The future president is selling me a Bible that has the Declaration of Independence slapped on it. I feel like that's a little bit weird, but instead, you know what happened? People started buying them for schools.
The way I think of it is like this. If I am a patriot, I love myself, I am my own unique individual first and foremost, but I love my country, I root for my country, and I think my country is the best country on the planet. But if I'm
You're an idiot in that way, because America is definitely not the best country on the planet. Mine isn't either, to be clear. But yeah.
nationalist, I view myself...
I would argue that in most cases, it's hard to argue that any country is. Like, there's probably, like, if you actually thought where is the best country on the planet, you'd probably pick a country that has, like, a relatively diverse form of government, where there's, like, there is a federal government, but there is also a lot more of a local government, and things differ. Because obviously it means different things to different people. America obviously wouldn't be the best because it's a shithole that has its money. America is one of the worst countries on the planet, with the exception that it has lots of money. If you took away its money, it would rank pretty low in terms of most things. Interestingly, though, Americans oftentimes put themselves down in order to pretend that they're going to improve things.
This is an American first and foremost. The individual part of me, as Cameron Stockford, comes later. I am first and foremost an American, and not only that, everything I do...
This is not true. The fella who is at the Nazi rally and is doing the Nazi salute, or as it's known now, the Elon Musk salute, who's listening to Hitler make his speech, and then goes home and runs the shop. Are they actually, putting the country any more forward than any other shopkeeper? Not really, no. I mean, they are putting the country forward, but only in the way shops work.
Would be to push the cause of America forward, to move the country
As said,
forward,
though,
to help
that's not
shape
true.
and progress the country. And after that, anything that affects me, as me, an individual, is secondary.
That's not really true. That would be maybe characteristic of like people in the business world who are combating with global businesses, army people, politicians who are dealing with the politicians. But when you're not talking about dealing with other countries, but this doesn't mean invading them, it just means interacting with them, then I would disagree with this, because classically that isn't really true, because most people don't really interact all that much. You might do something like not go on holidays, that might be something, but beyond that, like, there's not much the average person does in particular that puts the country forward that they wouldn't just do anyway in that job.
At Mussolini, we look at Hitler, we look at Brazil and Spain, whose names I can never remember for their leaders.
His name is Franco for Spain. One you should know because he lasted until he died of natural causes, unlike Hitler, who killed himself, and Mussolini, who was killed by his people. Probably something to be aware of, One of the longest lasting fascists in recent European history.
And we see people who fall into line with this government system really push themselves first and foremost as a German, as an Italian.
As already discussed, that's not even true. They might think that, but they're not actually doing anything with that. And even still, you go, okay, but how do you even analyze that? Even.
And then later, as their own individual identity, right? Everything
not particularly.
they did in Germany was for the good of the fatherland. It also exalts race.
Yeah. What? Oh, God.
Often, not always though, right? I don't think that Brazil was super big on the race aspect of it.
Oh, you don't?
But they probably were. I don't know. I'm not too...
Oh, but they probably were. You don't think they were, but they probably were. Great.
familiar with Brazil's fascism, I'll be honest with you. But, obviously Hitler thought that there was a supreme Aryan race and that Jews were
The word is Aryan. Also, we get back to this Nazi propaganda thing.
terrible. Mussolini, not so much about a superior race, but definitely thought the Jews were terrible and suppressed them.
I don't think it's big propaganda here. I think it's just the algorithm thing on TikTok and YouTube. But maybe don't play down the Nazi crimes of, killing millions of people, of the Holocaust. Maybe don't do that. Maybe don't use the word suppress them. And, maybe just don't do that. It comes off as if you're playing down the murder and attempted mass extermination of a religious group and many other groups beyond it, like people with disabilities, for example. It's...
This one's kind of hard to figure out whether or not it's happening because there's such that fine line between patriotism and nationalism. But at the end of the day, I think if you were to look at Trump, he would identify himself, first and foremost, as Donald Trump. He's a very selfish individual. And
okay, so
most Republicans would be the same way. They're going to identify first as themselves and then maybe somewhere down the line as a Republican or as an American. I don't see...
So, I think this is the problem with people not realizing that Hitler is different to the fucking idiots who listen to his speech and believe him. Let me explain. Do you think Hitler thought of himself as a German first? That would be a bit weird, wouldn't it? What with him being fucking Austrian, buddy? Think about that for a minute. You just don't seem to realize the fact that the person in the crowd who is a fascist, it's a little bit different to the person who's on the podium speaking to them saying, you should follow me. Hitler had an envision of a Germany where everyone who was in the upper class would be blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and would all be strong, good, strong boys. He wasn't blonde-haired, though. He wasn't from Germany. Like, the reality is, this is the question which has actually been asked, which is, would Hitler have survived had the Nazis continued? And people go, he probably would have because of the cult of personality. Hitler was not a good example of the Aryan race, is the point. A weak, talentless painter who took over a party he was supposed to be spying on. So it also implies that the party was kind of weak with him as well. Before him, I should say. Just saying. Just saying. Not exactly a great thing to go, that the person, the leader is the same as the people following him, right? No.
A whole lot of nationalism here. And as far as race goes, sure, Donald Trump and a lot of Republicans...
Yeah, well, you're a fucking idiot in terms of nationalism thing. Like, that's just America.
...make some pretty racist remarks, I'm not going to lie.
Oh, sorry. Donald Trump and the Republicans make a lot of racist remarks. You're not going to lie and hide that. So, imagine if I said, well, I've gathered in this room all the Stockfords in America, and they're all rapists. I'm just going to say that. Well, I'm sure some are good people, but they're rapists. They're rapists. That's what they do. And I'm going to deport them. Do you realize why that's like a little bit more than racist remarks? Do you realize that when you're in a debate with the other potential president of the United States and you say, they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, and then your vice president candidate comes along and says, yeah, we made that up. Yeah, we made that up. Yeah. You realize that feels like a little bit more than a racist remark. It feels like incitement, buddy. It feels like incitement. When you're at the point you're making up racist stuff, that feels like incitement to me.
Hide that, but I also think the Democrats do. How often do you hear...
Oh. So the Democrats do. Yeah, you're right. I wouldn't necessarily say it as much as the Republicans are doing now, but the Democrats certainly do. You have the crime bill that was Joe Biden who passed that, you have people who like call protesters who are protesting a mass killing of a nation, and they've called Democrats have called them the KKK, comparing them to the KKK, who killed people of color. Because, ooh, playing down the KKK there, aren't we? Bit dodgy there. All these sort of things, terrible things, right? Terrible things, awful things. Yeah, Democrats are quite racist. Yeah, you're right in that one. So those are my examples. But what would your examples be exactly?
Democrats say, oh, minorities need our help to do this, and
that's your example of their racist remarks.
they can't accomplish it without our help, and that's pretty demeaning.
Oh, it's pretty demeaning, right? Right. So the thing is, if I was to try and deport you, and I had the support of most of the government, and the Democrats said to you, don't worry, you need us, we'll help you, you would find that demeaning. The thing is, they do need the Democrats. The problem is more so, will the Democrats actually help them? Because the answer is not really, but they do need them, though. They need them. They do need them. That's not inaccurate. You fucking idiot. Like, seriously.
But without digging into the roots of that debate, let's look more at this definition. So it also says it has an autocratic government. Now, autocracy is an authority with one person in charge who possesses...
That's not actually particularly true. Merriam-Webster's just kind of sort of wrong here. Autocracy means absolute power. It does not mean necessarily a single individual, though. Like, it can be a small group of people. It has to be a small group of people, but it doesn't mean a single individual. You also have little problems like, for example, imagine if I had 50 people who were given powers that I didn't have, but they were loyal to me. Obviously, in that situation, even if I'm not able to, legally do that, then if those people follow my rule, no matter what I say, then effectively I am still an autocrat, right? Like, as long as you have the power to control all forms of government, even if it's not direct control, you still would say that person's an autocrat. In the same way that you would still call a country a democracy, even though voters aren't directly voting on laws. Because if you say the autocrat has to have absolute power in their hands and it has to be direct, then you are arguing that democracy needs to be direct as well. Right? Basic comprehension. Second thing is, what happens if an autocrat isn't legally allowed to have a power, but is effectively able to do it anyway because no one is going to stop them? In that situation, you still have an autocracy. Like, it doesn't matter if you go, well, it's illegal. It's illegal. Because people need to go, okay, well, the president said to kill this child. The president is not allowed to order me to kill this child. I won't kill the child. However, if the president is not allowed to tell me to kill this child, but the president said, kill the child anyway, and I do it, then it doesn't matter that there's a law against it. The president still had the power to do that. You see what I mean? You need to actually be able to enforce that. Otherwise, all you're saying is, they're not allowed to do that, though. And then, like, the people go, yeah, but stop them then. Stop them. That's the major issue here that you'll have. A problem you have, for example, in America is, well, turns out maybe they don't actually care for the law.
That's this unlimited power. Think Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar.
Julius Caesar is a terrible example because Julius Caesar was killed. Are you implying that we should do that?
A king who says, anything I do goes. Now, does
and also wasn't in power for that long.
Donald Trump have unlimited power? No, I don't think so. No more than any other president.
This is not true, for one.
Authority with one person in charge who possesses unlimited power. Think Julius...
That's not true, but anyway.
Caesar, Augustus Caesar. A king who says, anything I do goes.
You realize Julius Caesar had the Senate, right? And like most emperors had the Senate. They didn't have to listen to them, but they still had it.
Now, does Donald Trump have unlimited power? No,
Kind of does.
I don't think so. No more than any other president would.
This is just not true. Joe Biden is the only equal power person in the United States. And even that isn't particularly true. Joe Biden is the only one with equal levels of power as the presidency. Trump has the majority in the House, the Senate, the governors, the judiciary, he has himself, and he also has the ability to just go, fucking stop me. He's broken numerous laws. He's immune from prosecution. Joe Biden is the only other president who was immune from prosecution for actions done while president. No other president was immune from that. And you have to realize that, you know?
And you could argue that because he has a stacked Supreme Court and a Republican majority in the House and the Senate, that he's more likely to get things done. And there's an
Not more likely. He is literally able to commit any crime he wishes to. And as long as it is done while president and it's a presidential act, then it is considered legal. Do you think that might be a fucking issue?
argument that he has a lot of things he can control within the powers of the executive branch and their various departments, but those powers are not unlimited. On top
Fucking stop him then. That's the point. In order to say your country's not an autocracy, you need to be able to stop the person. You need to be able to say, you can't do that, and I'm going to stop you from doing it. Otherwise, you're just going, well, you can't do that. And they're going, I just did, so I guess I can then.
of that, there's a lot of Republicans in Congress who just don't like him and won't do everything he says because
that's not really true. I mean,
he's on his second term, cannot run again, and therefore they don't have to listen to what he says and write his curtails of popularity to keep their jobs. At this point, they will keep their jobs longer than him.
That is not true. There is a thing called midterms. I would imagine you should fucking know this as you're an American and I'm not. But there's a thing called the midterms, which is in 2 years. Actually, less than 2 years. So that happens 2 years from now, which will be during Donald Trump's presidency. Obviously, he could die before that happens. But if he lives, then he is going to last longer, potentially, than many of his colleagues. Also, he's able to effectively cause a primary problem for them in many cases. Not in all cases, but in many cases. Which can cause problems for them there, where they can basically lose out on being the Republican candidate. He could also, if he had enough seats or just didn't care about having a majority, he could just deliberately say, either vote for this now or else I will endorse the Democrat over you.
Same goes for the Supreme Court. That's the whole point of having lifetime appointments in the Supreme Court, so that once they're in, they don't have to be loyal to the leader or to anybody.
He could shoot them though, right? Technically speaking, he could have a Supreme Court member shot, and then because he's president, he would be the one to replace them, and he could just keep doing that. That's the thing he could do. You realize that is within his power. Within his legal power, he could just kill a Supreme Court member and then just replace them. I know this is kind of psychotic, but that's the reality of his power. Do you comprehend that fact? That he has the power to appoint Supreme Court justices, so he can have the power to make an opening, and then he has the power to fill that opening. The reality is that is a major problem. Beyond that is the fact that who's going to stop him?
Other than the law and the Constitution. So is or can Trump be an autocrat? No.
Yes. You realize that any country, you need to have a way of actually enforcing your laws. If I was to say, murder is now illegal, but then no police officers arrested people for murder, then murder would still effectively be legal. Effectively. That would mean that you could still get away with murder. Every time. 100%. So if you're the president and you pass an executive order saying, let's say the Department of Education is closed, and you're not allowed to do that. And then people from the opposing party go to the department and there are people blocking their entrance. Seems like a bit of a problem. You're not allowed to do that, but yet you are doing that. Okay, so you have one of your allies take control of the purse strings that is approved by Congress, and they are throwing the payment system into disarray. They're allowing unverified people to access and write code in the treasury. Do you see the problem yet? Are you seeing these sort of issues that you're saying, he can't do this? Turns out, he kind of can, because no one's fucking stopping him. You say, of course, well, courts have stopped him. Well, the thing is, if the Supreme Court doesn't stop him, then what you're kind of saying is either he's an autocrat, or else, don't worry, he's not an autocrat, he just rules alongside the members of the Supreme Court. Combined, that's a dictatorship, though, right? Like, you wouldn't say, oh, like if Xi Jinping was removed from office by his party, you wouldn't say, oh, it can't be a dictatorship then. It can't be a dictatorship because they removed him. I mean, they weren't particularly democratically elected, but it's fine because they removed their leader. Dictatorships remove their leader all the time and replace them with a new dictator. The reality is a dictator does not mean that a central person has ultimate power. It just means that you have small selection of people. Autocracies just means small selection of people. The people don't have a choice, but in general, the
definition also says led by a dictatorial leader, which is a person granted absolute emergency power and who holds complete
that once again is you using the wrong definition.
Autocratic control. Again, it's basically the same thing as the last one. Can he be a dictator within a certain amount of realm? Sure, because he's got powers over the executive branch, but no more than any other president would have.
Once again, we've already discussed the fact that Joe Biden is the only president who had equal powers in terms of the lack of holding him to account. And beyond that, even that's not true because they could have tried to impeach him, which...
with powers over the executive branch or with a majority of their own party in Congress. Obama had a supermajority in Congress in 2008, and yet...
Oh my God.
We didn't call him a dictator. Well, some Republicans did, I guess. But the point is, he was fine. Trump's probably going to be fine. While we're at it, let's talk about authoritarianism, which is of or relating to or favoring blind submission to authority or favoring a concentration of power in a leader or in a leader.
So, well, that's interesting, isn't it? That's interesting.
Not constitutionally responsible to the people. And again, even if he had...
This is why you shouldn't fucking trust Americans with their definitions. Loads of countries don't even have constitutions. Like, why does it use the word constitution? That doesn't even make any sense. There's loads of countries that don't have constitutions, which just makes no sense to go, well, what? Oh my God, like, just basic stuff.
People who completely agreed with him everywhere and he could do anything he wanted, he still is constitutionally responsible to the people, and then...
You need to have it enforced, though, buddy. Do you understand that fact? Otherwise, there's no point to it. Just saying you can't do this.
Unless he completely changes that constitution with a constitutional amendment.
Okay, this is something that needs to be understood by more people. It is illegal to steal. It is illegal to murder. It is illegal to do many things. Your laws block many things being done. What it takes is somebody saying, I'm either going to stop you or I'm going to punish you and stop you from doing that again. Now, the problem is, if I kill someone, they're still dead. You can't bring that person back, at least now. So, the reality of it is that there are certain actions you take as president that are just, they may be unconstitutional, but you've done them, that's it. And there are other actions which you need to stop the person. You need to stop the president. So can you see the police arresting Donald Trump and imprisoning him? Can you see that happening? Is that going to happen? Because he broke multiple laws? Oh, wait. They're not allowed to do that because it's the presidential act. Oh, looks like you might have accidentally locked yourself in a situation because now... It's not stop the person from doing it. It's stop the person from acting out what they said they would do, which is stopping the people who Donald Trump orders. So, that's a mutiny, right? Like, if he orders the military to do something, then the military need to mutiny. Or that the mutiny is not that. They need to do a coup, basically.
Which is extremely difficult to do. He cannot run again. This is also another hang-up that I have, the severe social, economic regimentation.
Once again, that's just literally saying, don't worry, guys, the Constitution's gonna hold. We're gonna keep in check.
Of society.
We are. Are you?
I just don't see this one. The idea is the Constitution with a constitutional amendment, which is extremely difficult to do. He cannot run again. This is also another hang-up that I have, the severe social, economic regimentation of society. I just don't see this one.
this is once again not in every definition of authoritarianism.
The idea is that...
So I don't know why exactly you are demanding that we use a specific definition from Americans. They're not known for their intelligence, buddy.
There's not just classes, but that they are strictly enforced classes between social hierarchies and economic hierarchies. And that's not to say we don't have a class system that is based on either social issues or economic issues. We do. But they are not strictly reinforced. They are really fluid. You can climb
They're not that fluid, buddy.
in and out of different ones. You can go up, you can go down. Doesn't matter who you...
No, I mean, not too many people became, worth $100 billion and then became worth 10,000. Not too many people did that in America. I'm just saying, that's not true. You can climb up a little bit, but you're not climbing to the top.
You are. In a fascist dictatorship, you're pretty much stuck where you're at. There is no rise.
It's not really true. I mean, the Nazis, promoted many people who were lower down. So did the supposed Communist Party in the USSR. Both those things were authoritarian, and they were not promoting people who were particularly skilled. Army, a bit different, but even still, but they weren't great.
Rising up. You're either part of the system and you're at the top, or you are not. This is also one of the very distinct differences between a communist dictatorship and a fascist dictatorship. Communist dictatorships try to eradicate all class systems, whereas fascist systems thrive on social class systems.
So let's be clear here. The major problem with the Nazis is not their economic policy. Their economic policy is your typical economic policy of anyone who is supercharged capitalism. Most countries that have capitalism consistently over year will slowly but surely strip workers' rights. Now, the Nazis just instantly banned unions. That they just did faster. There was a chance the communists could have even been in government. The Nazis got there instead. They banned unions. But there are many other governments that got there in the end, anyway. Maybe slowly, but anyway, Or effectively banned unions by just making it incredibly hard to unionize. And the point is, that's not the major issue. The major issue is not with moving up. Because yes, if you were competing against a major Nazi business, or someone was donating to the Nazi party, you would struggle. You would find it a big problem to compete. But if you weren't competing with a big business, if you were competing against other small businesses, you could be successful in that journey. Unless, of course, you were Jewish. Because then you wouldn't be able to compete. Then that wouldn't happen. First your rights get taken away. At least your equal rights. Then your house, any businesses you might own, taken away. And then eventually you're interned in a camp. The reality is, if you've got somebody who has a Jewish grandparent, they're not allowed, basically, to compete, even on a local level. But if someone isn't Jewish, isn't a part of any of these, minorities that they discriminate against, then the reality is they can do this. So I don't know why exactly there's this focus on the economy as if that's particularly what the fascists were about. No, it's more about social stuff. Are you Jewish? Are you gay? Are you trans? Do you have a disability? Do you have a different religion, in fact, at all? Main focus on Jews, but still, there's still a little bit of focus on Muslims as well. We won't go too near the Catholics, but still, The reality is, you need to match all of these things. You need to ensure you're not part of any of those groups. And of course, you need to ensure that you're not harbouring any of them either. Which we'll get into, We'll get into that. The point I'm making is, as long as you don't do any of those things, you basically just live in a typical capitalist country. Of course, the problem with that is that those things are inherent to you, isn't it? So you can't really stop doing them. But yeah, that's the reality. Those are social classes. They're not economic classes. And you should be able to pick on that fact. What with the major thing about the Nazis being, the concentration camps. They may be known by other people before them, but it's a major feature of them. You should be able to go that. And this is the part where I feel a little bit like, is this person just outright, just deliberately doing Nazi propaganda? Or are they just really, really stupid?
There's also the
Yeah, but okay, it doesn't matter.
idea of forcible suppression of opposition, and Trump has talked about doing that, but talking about doing it and actually following through are two different things. And any attempt that he had could still be challenged in the courts, especially since he doesn't control all of the courts.
It doesn't matter if he doesn't control all the courts. All you need is to control the Supreme Court, and then just make appeals.
And he can't.
Also, the way American courts work is you can select which place you do your appeal in or where you do your court case in. So it's a very stupid system because it means people are obviously going to do a thing called judge shopping, where they just decide to pick a judge effectively. They pick an area where a judge operates in. And they go, I'm going to file my lawsuit there because I know they're going to side with me.
Control all of the courts, especially state levels. You know who is suppressing opposition, though?
This is where he does this weird thing where he just ignores what RFK did.
The Democrats. They sued RFK and Jill Stein and a lot of the swing states to have them forcibly removed from the ballot.
Do you know why they sued RFK? They sued RFK because RFK had his name on all these states and then took his name off all the states where he was believed to be taking votes from Republicans and kept his name on all the states where it was believed his name was taking votes away from Democrats. That's why they did that. Because he did a blatantly unconstitutional thing of saying, this situation in this state where I could accidentally give the Democrats the state, my name's off. But this state where I could give the Republicans the state, keep my name on. That is blatant. You cannot be a spoiler candidate in only some areas in order to fix the election. If you're going to be a spoiler candidate, it's all or nothing. Or single, all, nothing, or one place.
Just because they thought that they were going to take away or spoil their own campaigns. And there might have been some of that, sure, but that doesn't seem very democratic.
It is actually democratic. It's actually what you would do in a democracy. Why is it allowed for you to have your name on ballots in only some states, but not others, but not one? Just some, but not all, but not one. That doesn't really make much sense. You can't be president via that. So it's not like you're actually, like if everyone in those states voted for you, you still wouldn't be president. So how does that work exactly? How does that work? Come on, fine.
Now, one thing that I think Merriam-Webster...
I think that's your juice boy. I mean, there we are. Also, if you're wondering, what has Trump done since he got into office? He has, for one, removed some of the gerrymandering laws. Not gerrymandering laws, but he's helped gerrymandering by removing some of the Biden-era rules. So what does that mean? It means in the next election, the Republicans can do more gerrymandering, and that means that they can have a less democratic election next time. By the way, next time would mean other elections as well. So yeah, just saying, kind of not looking great in the whole Republicans being pro-democracy thing. Of course, I'm not claiming that anyone has ever been pro-democracy. America, it doesn't really have a great history with democracy. But the point I'm making is they are not doing much better.
Leaves out of their definition of fascism that other places like Encyclopedia Britannica, Wikipedia, lots of academics...
Wikipedia is not a dictionary, but anyway.
Do include in their definitions of fascism is militarism.
Wikipedia is an encyclopedia, and largely it is going off of historical examples. I don't know why you just decided to include this when you decided to use the Merriam-Webster definition, which isn't actually that popular in terms of its, things there.
Which is the prominence of the military class or its ideals, exaltation of military virtues and ideals, or a policy of aggressive military preparedness. And in just about every other fascist system I can think of, the movement, before they're even in power, creates their own paramilitary.
That's not necessarily true. In many instances, it is a crime to beat people up and to direct them to beat people up. So if I say, hey, my proud boys, I want you to stand by. You realize why that might indicate that if they do violence, you are directing them to do so? Do you see that? Do you see why oftentimes there is a bit of distance made deliberately? Because you don't want to be a political leader who is the one who finds themselves in prison. Because what tends to happen then is that you're the little wimp who has to be let out by the next fella. Imagine if Hitler continued to be in prison and instead of becoming the leader of the Nazi party had to sort of step down and someone else took over and they were made chancellor and then they had to go, and I pardon Hitler. Like that would be, wouldn't be as nice for him, would it? So obviously leaders try and distance themselves from the violent actions of the group. Which is where they go, they're just our supporters. They're not our military, they're just our supporters. They might like us, but...
Police force, whatever, of some kind, that goes around and...
Yeah, when they're in power, they create the police force.
...presses opposition in order to gain their power.
Just to be clear, Tom Homan, Donald Trump's border czar, is threatening to prosecute and arrest a governor for harboring and concealing immigrants.
Think the SS in Nazi Germany. Trump doesn't have a militia. There might be
kind of does, actually. What were those people who did that coup?
some people who claim to be a militia for Trump, but they're not.
What the fuck do you think a militia is? Are you expecting him to come out and say, "This is my militia"? He has the army now. Why would he?
Trump's militia.
Bother.
Nor is Trump using the military to enforce his rule.
I'm just putting in here. I don't really understand this point, because, like, every president uses the military to do what they want. That's the force thing. Obviously, if you want to do something and you're the president, you need to use force to do it. If people refuse, obviously, it's about what you want to do. That's the problem. You understand? Force isn't the issue. It's what you're using the force for, and also what you do with that force as well, you know. He wasn't in fucking power on the 12th of November, you idiot! Jesus Christ, this is basic stuff.
This is a long video, but all that in mind, I don't think Trump is a fascist. Does he have some aspects?
Are you actually, like, this is the reality. This person's a idiot. Poor understanding of German history, which is a bit concerning. A bit of Nazi propaganda was included in there. Just quite general, just like, oh, but he can't do this. And going, well, he actually can do this, because he can just say, you're going to stop me? And then beyond that, just not understanding that the phrase "is Trump a fascist" means does he want to do fascism, not can he. Do you understand that point? Do you understand that? Anyway, very weird understanding here. Like, this is very, very odd. Poor understanding from Mr. Stockford here.
Aspects of fascism, sure, absolutely, but so do most people. But if we were to put every government system on a big Venn diagram, they would all have a lot of crossover. Be sure
no, not really.
to follow for more.
I mean, not really when it comes to fascism. But anyway, that is that. I'll simply ask you, what is your favorite line from Mein Kampf?
They're ruining our country. And it's true. They're destroying the blood of our country. That's what they're doing. They're destroying our country. They don't like it when I said that. And I never read Mein Kampf. They said, oh, Hitler said that in a much different way. And they're destroying the blood of our country. They're destroying the fabric of our country. And we're going to have to get them out.